The sound that woke the child was one the house had not made in 18 months. Someone building a fire in her mother's stove before the sun was up. She came down the stairs in her nightgown, small and silent, and stopped on the bottom step and watched a big, quiet woman knelt at the cold iron range in the gray Colorado dark, feeding and kindling with hands that did not fumble and did not hurry and did not once reach out toward the child watching her. Outside, 20 hungry men would ride in by sunup. The woman had been hired for 1 week. Neither of them yet knew what a single week could do. If your throat just tightened, if you know what it is for a house to go quiet after a loss, and what it means when somebody finally makes it warm again, then stay with me, because this is only the first morning. Subscribe to this channel and ring the bell so the next story finds you. And drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Then come back to Antler Creek, Colorado, in the spring of 1889, where a grieving rancher had hired a shy woman to cook for 1 week and had no notion at all that he was about to lose his heart. Hannah Lowe was 30 years old, and she had spent the better part of her life learning how to take up the least possible room in a world that had decided she took up too much. She was a big woman and a shy one. The two had grown up together in her, the size drawing the eyes and the shyness teaching her to drop her own, and she had never married, and she made her living the only way a woman alone could, who had no people and no land behind her, cooked. She'd boarding houses, hotel kitchens, harvest crews, a railroad camp one hard winter. She went where the work was, and she kept her head down, and she let her hands do her talking, because her hands had never once stammered, whatever her mouth chose to do. When the notice came through the Antler Creek Church that the Hatcher place wanted a cook for the spring roundup, 1 week, top wage, room and board, she answered it the same day. A week's wage was a week's wage, and the notice had not asked one word about what she looked like. The man who drove her the last 7 miles out talked the way lonesome men do, to fill a quiet they cannot abide. "Cole Hatcher," he said, slapping the reins. "Good cattleman. Hard year on him, though, and a harder one before it. Lost his wife the year before last, Cora. Buggy team spooked on the river road and took her clean over the bank, him not even there to see it done. Got a little girl, Lily, sweet as anything, but she went quiet after, and never come back from it. And Vint Dolan off the next range been circling that place like he smells the end of it, waiting on Hatcher to sell cheap." He cut a sideways look at the size of her, and thought better of whatever he meant to add. Antler Creek looked her over when she stepped down from the coach, the way towns always did. A woman at the dry goods window said a thing behind her hand to another, and they both laughed the small, mean laugh Hannah had heard in 100 towns. She had never owned the kind of steel that lets a body stare a whole town back down. What she had instead was practice. She put her eyes on the road ahead and walked to the wagon, and did not give them her face to enjoy. And by the time the town fell behind her, she had folded the whole of it away into the place she kept such things, deep and nearly full, and long since past her expecting it to empty. The Hatcher house, when it rose up against the foothills, was a good house gone gray at the edges, not poor but untended, the particular way a thing goes when the one who tended it is gone. And the kitchen, when she stepped inside it, told her everything before Cole Hatcher said a single word. A woman's apron hung still on its peg by the stove. The good dishes stood dusty behind their glass. The range had held no real fire so long that the very iron of it had rusted at the seams. It was not a dirty kitchen. It was a kept one, kept exactly as a dead woman had left it, like a breath held too long. No one had cooked a true meal in it in a year and a half. Cole Hatcher came in off his horse and looked at her the way the town had, only without the cruelty in it. A tired man measuring a stranger and braced to be disappointed, the way a man is braced who has already lost 3 cooks that one spring. He was tall and worn and not yet 40, and carried the kind of stillness that is not peace but its opposite. "You're the cook," it was not a question. "Hannah Lowe," she said, soft, to a point just past his shoulder. 1 week, he said, 20 odd men, 3 meals a day, starting tomorrow's breakfast. Buyer comes Saturday. Herd sells, and then you're paid and you're done. That suit you?" "It does." Then, because there was the one thing she would not leave unsaid, shy as she was, "I'll need the run of the kitchen, Mr. Hatcher. I can't feed 20 men working around a thing I'm not allowed to touch." His eyes went to the apron on the peg, just once, fast, and away again. "Touch what you need for the cooking," he said, and it came out rougher than he had meant it. And she understood the whole shape of the man from that one rough sentence and that one glance. The girl's Lily. She won't trouble you. She don't talk. Don't talk the way a man steps wide around a hole in a dark floor. Then he was gone, back out to the work, before she could answer him, because answering led to other things, and he had walled those things off a long time ago. Hannah stood alone in the cold museum of that kitchen, with her trunk still at her feet. She looked a long moment at the apron on its peg, and then she did not take it down, because some things are not as strangers to move, and she had a sense for which things those were. She took her own apron out of her trunk and tied it on. She worked the rust from the range's seams. She built the fire the child would come down to in the dark, and she began. By the time the crew rode in at that first sunup, the kitchen smelled of a thing it had not smelled of in 18 months. Coffee and frying bacon, and biscuits coming gold out of a hot oven, the smell filling the cold house and pushing the held-breath stillness back room by room. 20 hard men who had lived a week on a hired boy's scorched beans sat down to a proper breakfast and went quiet over it, the particular quiet of men remembering all at once that eating can be a pleasure and not only a need. One old hand, gray as a badger and twice as sour, ate 3 of her biscuits, and then sat turning the 4th in his fingers like it had told him something he was still working out. And Cole Hatcher, at the head of his own table for the first time in a year and a half, ate everything in front of him without seeming to notice that he did. And that, though no one said a word of it, was the first thing in that house to thaw. The child came to her sideways the way the truly wounded come, testing the floor before each step. Hannah did not push. She had no push in her. She only left, each afternoon, some small warm thing at the low end of the table where a small person's hand could reach it, a cooling biscuit, a cup of milk, a heel of bread with honey on it. And then she went on with her work and did not turn to see whether it was taken. It was always taken. On the 3rd day she turned from the stove and found Lily standing at her elbow, holding up a tin cup in both hands. "It's for you," the child said. "You didn't have any water." It was a whole sentence, and it was the most the girl had said to any living soul in a year and a half, and Cole Hatcher heard it from the doorway and had to put his hand flat against the frame to stand. Hannah took the cup as though children handed her water every day of her life. "Thank you, Lily," she said. "I was just getting thirsty." She did not make it into more than it was. She had learned that the fastest way to send a half-wild thing back into the brush is to let it see how badly you want it to stay. He showed his care the way that kind of man does, sideways and without a word for it. The kitchen pump had been stiff to the point of cruelty, and she had fought it that first day with the whole of her weight. The second morning it gave water smooth as anything, and there was oil on the handle, and no one remarked on it. A shelf she could not reach got moved down a peg in the night. The woodbox stayed full past any asking, and he took to being the last man at the table of an evening, not talking, only sitting a while in the warm before he went out into the cold of the rest of the house, and she took to leaving the coffee on for him, and that was the whole of their conversation most nights, and it carried more than talking would have. She did more than cook, the way capable women do once they have seen what is wanting. She set the wreck of the pantry into rows. She drew a rope burn out of a young hand's palm with a bread poultice, and the night she heard Lily cry out from a dream, she went up and sat on the edge of the small bed in the dark, and did not tell the child there was nothing to fear, because that is a lie children always catch. She told her instead that she would leave the lamp burning in the hall, and that a person who can smell bread baking is never altogether alone in a house, and the girl held her sleeve in one fist until sleep took her. There was one night that week Hannah let it take her, and only one. When the supper things were done and the house had gone dark, she sat on the edge of her narrow cot and felt the whole of it come up at once, that on Saturday she would fold her aprons and climb onto a wagon and be a stranger again, gone from this warm kitchen and this sideways child and this man who left the coffee on for her. She had let herself want a thing, and wanting was a luxury she had given up years before, and the bill for it had come due fast. She pressed her apron to her face and wept hard and short into it, the way she did everything that was only hers, quietly, taking up no room. Then she dried her face and lay down, because the men would want breakfast at 4, whether or not her heart had any business breaking. She did not let it take her again. It was Cora's recipe book that nearly undid the whole of it. Hannah found it in the dresser drawer where she had gone hunting a clean cloth, a thin book in a careful hand, Cora Hatcher, her receipts. The pages gone soft with use. A lesser woman would have left it shut. A crueler one would have made something of it. Hannah read it the way you read a letter from someone you are only sorry never to have met, and on the fifth night quietly, she made Cora's own buttermilk pie off Cora's own page and set it on the table. Cole Hatcher took one bite of it and stopped with the fork halfway down, and his face did a thing she had not meant to cause, and for one long terrible moment she believed she had made the worst mistake of a bad week. Then he set the fork down and said, "Lo," not lifting his eyes. "She made that every Sunday of her life." "I know," Hannah said, as low as he. "It's in her hand so it wouldn't get lost." Seemed ashamed to let her hand go to waste. He did not answer her, but he ate the whole slice. And he did not tell her to put the book back in the drawer, and that was its own kind of permission. The buyer was coming Saturday, and the whole year rode in on him. Cole would not say it, but the men did, around her table, that the Hatcher brand was one hard winter from going under, that the herd had to count out full and sell square, that Vint Dolan off the next range had already let it be widely known he would take the place off Cole's hands cheap and friendly the day Cole was ready to quit. None of them believed Cole was far from quitting. None of them had reckoned on the fire. It came on the fourth night, the way the worst things on the high plains always come, out of a dry sky, on a single fork of heat lightning that touched the cured spring grass to the west, and turned a black night orange in the time it took to cross the room to the window. The cried up across the yard, fire on the west range, and every man Hannah had fed for 4 days was up into the saddle. Inside 2 minutes, Cole at the head of them, riding straight toward the one thing left that could finish him, the gathered herd, the spring calves, the whole year's money, the ranches Cora had helped him raise, all of it standing square in the path of a wall of flame. Hannah did not ride, and she did not wring her hands. She did the thing that was hers to do, and she did it all the night through without being asked once. She built every fire in the place roaring and set on every pot she owned, and when the men came staggering back in relays, black to the eyes, coughing half-blind from the smoke, she had coffee and food and water and wet cloths ready, and she fed them and turned them around and sent them back out able to fight. When 2 hands carried in young Tom Pruitt with his arm burned wrist to shoulder, she swept the kitchen table clear with one arm and worked over him by lamplight, cool water, clean torn linen, a low steady voice, hour upon hour, the way a person tends a thing she has decided will not be lost on her watch. Lily would not be sent up to bed. She stayed at Hannah's knee through the whole of it, wringing cloths and fetching, a small silent partner, because there are nights a child is better off working at your side than lying alone upstairs listening to the world burn. Cole came in near 3 in the morning, when the wind had at last swung round, and the backfire had caught, and the worst of it was beaten back. He was burned along one hand and gray to the lips with smoke and shaking, though not from any cold. He stood in the doorway of his own kitchen and looked at it. The wounded boy mending on the table, the fed men still out holding the line, the child safe at the big woman's side, the stove roaring like a living thing, and something in him that had been frozen solid for 18 months simply gave way. "I wasn't there when Cora went," he said, and his voice came out wrecked. "I bought that team green and I told her it was gentle, and I wasn't on the road when it carried her over the bank. 18 months I couldn't make myself walk into this kitchen, because it was the last room she ever stood up straight in. And tonight I rode off into a burning night, and left my girl behind with a woman I hired 4 days ago, and I knew, driving cattle through the smoke, that she was the safest she has been since the day her mother died." He stopped. He looked at Hannah the way a man looks at solid ground after a long bad crossing. Hannah did not tell him it was not his fault. She had buried enough of her own to know exactly how worthless that is to say to a man. She crossed the kitchen and poured him coffee and pressed the warm cup into his unburned hand, and she drew a chair out for him beside the boy he had carried in, and she sat herself down next to him in the smoke and the lamplight, and she stayed there, and that was the whole of it, and it was everything. The fire died against the backfire before dawn. The greater part of the herd was saved. 3 days of grass were gone, and a long stretch of west fence, and one young hand would carry the scar of that night the rest of his life. But the brand was alive, and so were all of them. The buyer came Saturday as promised, a spare, hard-eyed man named Sutter, down from Denver with a bank draft and no sentiment anywhere on him, and half the valley came out with him, the way a country comes to see whether a neighbor will stand up or go down. Vint Dolan came too, in a clean coat, smiling, dead certain the fire had at last finished what the lean years had started, ready to make his cheap and friendly offer over the smoking ground, and there was a Mrs. Dolan on his arm, who had been one of the two women laughing at the dry goods window the morning Hannah stepped off the coach. But the herd counted out. It counted out because there was a herd left at all to count, because 20 men had ridden 4 days and one burning night and come back each time fed and able to climb back on. And Sutter was cattleman enough to read a sound outfit and a crew that would not quit. He paid square, and he paid it in front of everybody, and Vint Dolan's cheap and friendly offer died in his throat unspoken. The smile slid off him, and he and his wife had nothing to do but stand in the yard of a ranch that had refused to die and watch it go on living. And then the only trouble left was the quietest and the worst. Hannah's week was up. Her trunk stood packed by the kitchen door, because the terms had been 1 week and the week was spent, and she was far too shy to ask to stay and far too proud to hint, and Cole Hatcher had not asked a soul for anything in 18 months and gave no sign of knowing how to start. The wagon that would carry her to the coach road stood waiting. The crew had gone quiet, watching it. Even Sutter slowed his count to watch, and for one long terrible minute it looked as though she would pick up her trunk and climb up and be gone. The way she had come and gone from 100 towns, folded away again into somebody else's deep and nearly full place. Cole Hatcher had spoken almost nothing for a year and a half. What he said next he said in front of the buyer and the crew and the whole gathered valley and the woman who had laughed at the window, and he did not trouble to make it pretty. My herd's alive because my men could ride, and my men could ride because that woman fed them through 2 nights of fire. He turned to the crowd, and his voice did not shake now. My daughter spoke her first words in 18 months to her. There's been a fire in my house every morning for a week, and I've eaten at my own table, and I have slept the night through. He looked at Hannah then, full on, the first time he had let himself. I hired her for a week. I was a fool to think a week would be the end of it. Don't get on that wagon. Stay, marry me or don't, in your own time and on your own terms, but stay. Lily Hatcher crossed that yard at a dead run and took hold of Hannah's skirt in both fists and pressed her face into it, and that was the child's whole vote, cast in plain sight of everyone. Over by the gate, Mrs. Dolan found something on the ground worth studying, and Hannah Lowe, who had spent 30 years making herself the smallest thing she could in any doorway, stood in the middle of that yard with her packed trunk at her feet and lifted her eyes up off the dirt and onto the man's face, which was a thing she did not do, and said not loud but clear enough for the whole still yard to hear her, "I'll stay. Not to take her place, I wouldn't, and you'd not want a woman who would." A breath. "But I've been passing through other people's lives my whole life long, Mr. Hatcher. I believe I would like to stop." It was the longest speech she had made to any person in years, and she did not once drop her eyes through the whole of it. They were married in the fall, when the second cutting was in, and the herd money was banked, and the new fence ran straight along the west range where the burn had been. The apron Cora Hatcher left on the peg hangs there yet. Hannah never did take it down, but beside it now hangs a second apron. And on Sunday mornings Lily stands on a stool at that stove making her mother's buttermilk pie out of her mother's book. Hannah's broad hands over hers on the rolling pin, and the two names live together in that kitchen without ever crowding one another, the way Hannah always meant them to. The stove is never cold now. The child who would not speak can no longer be hushed. Sometimes, in the dark before a working dawn, Hannah is the first one down to wake the fire, and she will hear small feet come quick on the stair and turn and find Lily on the bottom step in her nightgown, come down to the sound the house makes now every single morning of its life. The woman holds out her hand. The child takes it. Neither of them is shy with the other any longer. Hannah Hatcher had been told the whole of her life that she was too much, too big, too quiet, too plain to be chosen by anybody for anything past the labor of her hands. She had spent 30 years folding herself small in doorways and tucking her hurts away into a place she thought would never empty. She does not fold herself anymore. There had turned out to be a house and a man and a child and a whole Green Valley's worth of room for precisely as much woman as she was, and she had stopped at the last, apologizing for 1 inch of the space she takes up in this world. 30 years on, in the spring of 1919, Lily Hatcher, grown and married, with a quiet, big-hearted girl of her own at her skirts, drove out to the home place every Sunday she was able. The kitchen was always warm. There was always pie. And her stepmother's hands, slower with the years but no less sure, were always busy at the stove of a house that had once held its breath for a year and a half, and had long since learned how to let it go.